Hi, I'm Kenneth C. Davis, and I am the author of Don't Know Much About History and other books in the Don't Know Much About series, as well as other books about history. I try and make the stuff you thought was very boring back in high school a little bit more fun and interesting because it is very important. A lot of people are not even aware of the idea that the Constitution nowhere mentions parties. The system that we have was not built around parties. That has been an evolution completely outside the Constitution. In fact, if you go back and listen to George Washington, just as he's leaving the presidency after the first term, he was not a member of any particular party. He issues a farewell address and he says to the people, beware of faction, which is the word they used to describe parties then. They were afraid of parties because they were afraid at that time in particular they'd be regional parties. It would be geographic as opposed to an idea of philosophy. What happened, of course, is that almost immediately, as soon as the government was established, people did start lining up and creating political parties because that was the only way to actually get anything done, to create like-minded people who would come together and be able to pass legislation through the Congress. So while the Constitution and our electoral system never mentions parties, and the Founding Fathers, some of them, warned against political parties, they began almost right away and began the system pretty much as we know it today. It's evolved. We've had many parties over the centuries, but there's nothing in the Constitution that says we have to have two parties, and certainly nothing in the Constitution that says anything about primaries and caucuses and all that. Those are all the creation of the parties themselves, not the Constitution. The parties begin almost right away, as I say. You have, first of all, the idea in the beginning was that in a presidential election, people would be put up, and the first place finisher would be the president, and the second place finisher would be the vice president. And that's, of course, what happened with George Washington and John Adams, and that worked fine for the first 8 years. Then the parties started to develop because policies were being put in place. The first party we can think of and call the Federalist Party, that was John Adams's party. They wanted a strong central government. They wanted more power centered in the federal government, the power to tax, the power to arm the country. That was the idea of John Adams to a degree, and more importantly, Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of the Treasury in the first administration under Washington. On the other side, you had people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who were a little bit more leery of too much power in the central government. They wanted more power left with the states. So part of this idea from the very beginning was keep the power in the central government versus keeping the power in the states. And that's how the two parties started to evolve. And because of that, you see lots of different changes over the centuries, but that fundamental idea has always been there. A strong central government as opposed to the government being really left to the states to decide, and a weaker central government that wouldn't dictate too many things. 200 years later, we've seen parties come and go. Of course, we've had the Democrats basically since the 1830s. Is the oldest of the two parties that exist. The Republican Party was created just before the American Civil War in 1856. So even though it's called the Grand Old Party, it's not actually the oldest one.